Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in a very special live stream. This is Fadi, of course. And I know I've been sporadically doing these live streams intentionally, and my focus lately has been on this ongoing conflict. And I say it with a broken heart that regardless of what you hear in the news, this is still going to be an ongoing conflict between Israel, Iran, and the ideology behind it. And today, of course, I have the privilege of inviting a very special guest who actually, from, of course, a Jewish background, but at the same time, he lives in Israel. He lives in the Holy Land. And therefore, we are going to really get an insider look on what happened, what's going on, what could be the case moving forward. And he's also a brother in the Lord. He's a pastor as well. So he's going to bring in a lot of amazing biblical insights as well. I've been following him for a long time now on X, which is known previously as Twitter. And he's been making a lot of amazing arguments concerning some of the biblical views for or against Israel, at least the biblical Israel. With that in mind, let me invite our dear brother, Dr. Ron Cantor. And of course, Ron, thank you so much for taking the time, brother, to be here with us.
It is a pleasure to be with you.
Well, brother, why don't you just take maybe a minute or so and give people just a brief background about yourself and how can they follow you moving forward?
Okay, well, the easiest way to stay in touch with us is roncantor.com, RONCANTOR.com. It's probably on the screen. So I came to Yeshua, Jesus, in 1983, 18 years old, Jewish, never had really considered the reality of God, even though I was traditionally, raised Jewish. But my best friend became a believer. That's a whole nother story that we won't get into, but that ended the search ended in 1983, October, when I prayed and asked the Lord to show me the truth. And the next thing I knew, I was upside down in an automobile. And then in the only house around, two people invited us in their home and they shared the gospel with me. So I came to the Lord that day and was shocked when I began to read the Bible and see that everyone in the New Testament was Jewish. You know, this whole thing took place right here in Israel. So we moved here. I married my wife. We moved here in 2003. Presently, I lead a ministry called Shelanu TV, and we're a team of Israelis who share the gospel on the first and only digital TV station in Hebrew, sharing the gospel with Jewish people.
Well, that's wonderful, brother. Thank you so much, of course, for taking time again. I know it's evening where you're at the moment. So let's visit a horrible, horrible event, and that's the October 7th. Tell us a little bit more about what happened, at least on that day. Was it expected, meaning an attack like this at some point, even though the date wasn't known, or was it a total surprise?
It was a total surprise. We were caught off guard completely in 100%. There are reports. There's never been a full investigation done, and that's because our politicians are like other politicians around the world. They don't want to be blamed. But the fact is that we became soft. We just assumed that Hamas did not have that type of capability. We had these watchers. These are female soldiers in the army, and their job is simply to watch Gaza. And they were warning. They were sending up the warnings to the chain of command, and they were being ignored. So it was unexpected, and it was a shock. To this day, it is heartbreaking to hear stories of people who were waiting all day for the military to show up, and it took hours for the army to get organized. So it's a dark day, maybe the darkest day in the 77-year history of the state of Israel.
It is indeed shocking, if you ask me. I mean, knowing what we know today about the military and intelligence capability of Israel as a government, it is definitely a little bit of a surprise to me that something like this would happen. And at the same time, the amount of tunnels that we kept hearing about, it's baffling to me. How can such an amount of miles and miles of tunnels been dug without anyone at least noticing? I mean, I would love these guys to dig tunnels for me. I mean, it seems like they are proficient in doing so.
Well, we're building a subway in Tel Aviv, so if we could have peace, they would have jobs for sure. But the truth of the matter is that we knew about the tunnels. We did not know how vast they were, and I think the general thinking was, all right, they're building tunnels, but it's in Gaza. We also knew that that's a big part of their commerce. Is if you literally stopped all the smuggling between Egypt and Gaza, and by the way, this is something that a lot of people do not know. Gaza has a border with Egypt. Gaza is predominantly an Arab enclave, and Egypt is an Arab country. And so they have a common border. People think that it is Israel alone that has put up a fence, but Egypt has not welcomed them in, does not want them in. And when anybody actually begins to talk about, hey, maybe you could create something in the Sinai desert, where these people could live in peace, Egypt is like, no, we don't want that. So Israel gets all the blame, but Gaza actually borders two countries, and there are tunnels that go in and out of Egypt, and it's a big part of their commerce, illegal smuggling. So, on October 7th, I'll just take you through that day. My wife and I, we were in France at the time. We woke up in Geneva, Switzerland that morning, and we took a train to go to Marseille, which is a very interesting city because it's 1 million people, 30% Muslim and 10% Jewish. So that's 100,000 Jews and 300,000 Muslims. They live in relative peace together. But we were going there that day to minister. It was the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and there's a church there that was going to have a Feast of Tabernacles celebration. It was Saturday, and then I would preach Sunday morning. So we woke up in Geneva, and my wife says to me, there are bombings, rocket fire in Israel. Now, this is 6:30 in the morning, which would have been 7:30 here in Israel. And I said to her, well, that's normal. Like it's a weird thing to say. When I reiterated this to a pastor friend of mine in Brazil, he's like, stop, wait a minute. What do you mean that's normal? And I had to explain to him that rocket fire is just a part of life here in Israel. So we don't get, I could have sirens go off right now and it just doesn't produce the type of fear. I have a safe room. My wife and I would go there. We'd lock the door and we would wait for the all clear and come out. Now, that is different than the ballistic missiles from Iran, and we can talk about that later. But when she told me there were rocket fire, I didn't panic. But very quickly, we realized it was something different, that there was an unusual amount of rocket fire. In our city, Ashkelon, we were ground zero for the rocket fire. And our friends that were here told us that they were locked in their safe rooms all day long. And by the way, 40,000 Israelis in Ashkelon do not have safe rooms. So that's about 1/4 of the city that every time these alarms would go off, they would have to run either to a basement bomb shelter or to the stairwell or an outdoor bomb shelter. So it's not like everybody has a safe room. Thank God that 2/3 or 3/4 rather of the city does. And then, of course, we have the Iron Dome, but the Iron Dome is not perfect. Nevertheless, we were used to rocket fire. It was unusual. It was crazy. And as we made our way on the train to Marseille, we began to hear reports of incursions, that there were terrorists invading the country. That was when we first were kind of in shock. Like, what's going on? And we're thinking 30, 40 maximum. Like when the dust settled and we realized that there were 3,000 terrorists inside of Israel, and there were 2,500 other Gazans who simply saw what was happening and just came into the country to loot, because they went on the kibbutzim, which are these collective farms that border the Gaza area. It's where a lot of our fruit and vegetables and everything come from. People saw it as an opportunity. There were different people from Gaza that came in and out several times, grabbing TVs, anything they could grab and take back with them. So it was crazy. And then we began to hear about hostages, and we just couldn't even fathom that there were that Jewish Israelis, and it wasn't just Jewish, there were Bedouins, there were Arabs, there were foreign workers from Thailand that were taken into captivity. But even then, we thought 10, 15 maximum. Again, when we found out, the number kept going up. The number of deaths kept going up. The number of captives kept going up. When the final numbers came in, it was 1,200 Israelis that were killed, that were murdered, often in cold blood. Some of them shot at point blank range with their hands in the air. There were women and girls underage who were raped. Some of them, and I just want to give a trigger warning to anybody watching that what I'm sharing now is difficult, but there were girls who were raped multiple times and then shot, killed. It was just horrible. So 1,200 were murdered, 250 went into captivity. And Elon and I are just trying to get back here. Our friends are telling us, go home to America. That's where I'm from originally. And there's something in the Israeli psyche. When there's a battle, you run to it. You don't run away from it. Like the idea of going to America, I couldn't have lived with myself going forward. So we were struggling in Marseille to find a flight back into Israel. For a while, planes weren't flying, but it took us 6 days. We got a flight back. And when we landed, we went straight to a neighborhood that had become an army base. So a lot of that we call the moshavim. Moshavim it's like a kibbutz. I'll give you a little lesson here, but a kibbutz is this, it's kind of based on socialism. Nobody owns anything, but everything's paid for, and it doesn't really work great, but they all love living together and they farm, and sometimes they have hotels and other things. Well, the moshavim, they're neighborhoods that are a little bit like that, but you have your own house, your own property, and it's a bit closer to capitalism. And so these moshavim, you couldn't go into the kibbutzim because they were destroyed. I mean, they were and for the first few days, we didn't know if there were terrorists that were still in the country. So there's a restaurant right down the road from me called Victory, and the owner of it, Hani, her brother, on October 9th, 2 days afterwards, he knew that the cows had not eaten in 2 days. So he said, I have to go back it was near the border. I have to go back and feed the cows. He goes back. 2 terrorists jump out who are hiding, and they shot him. They killed him. So in the beginning, it was several days before, there was an all clear. So these neighborhoods that were further out became makeshift army bases. And we went straight from the airport to one of these army bases just to serve. I'm not a fighter. I've never been in the army, but we said, what can we do? What can we do to help? And so I'm chopping cucumbers and making dinner and for hundreds of soldiers, not by myself, with many other volunteers, because when these things happen, the country's mobilized. If you're not fighting, you're helping, you're serving. So we did that. And a woman came up to me that day and she said to me, someone must have told her that we had a ministry or a nonprofit. And she said, could you somehow get my son a bulletproof vest? This is how unready we were as a nation, is that we had IDF soldiers who did not have bulletproof vests. And I didn't believe her at first. I said, ma'am, that's crazy. We're the IDF. We are the superpower of the Middle East. How can you not? But she convinced me. We made a quick little video with my iPhone. Thousands of dollars poured in. We began to buy bulletproof vest, helmets. Winter, it got cold eventually, and a lot of people think of this as a tropical area, but we don't get snow. We get rain, and then everything gets muddy. And at night, it can be quite uncomfortable. So we're buying blankets and not just for soldiers. There were evacuees, refugees in their own country. 70,000 people lost their homes in the Gaza area. And then in the north, because Hezbollah was firing on us constantly, 80,000 people had to flee. And so you had 150,000 Israelis living around the country with relatives in because tourism was gone. There was no tourism. So the hotels became, refugee centers, refugee camps. And it was just a crazy, crazy, sad, horrible. I remember those first 6 days when we were still in Marseille. Ilana and I, my wife, we would just weep all day because nothing like this had happened to Israel since the Holocaust. So that was the beginning of it. And then we continued, every day we would go out and do whatever we could to serve. And somehow we would then meet new people and find new needs. So we'd come home that afternoon and we would take nap. We'd be exhausted. We would nap, we'd wake up, and then I would write a newsletter and have media and get that. I'd probably get to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock or finish at 9 or 10 o'clock, eat dinner, go to bed and do it again. And we did that for about 6 months. And we took some trips. I went to England where I spoke at a rally. There was about 10,000 people there of Christians supporting Israel. So it has been a crazy time. It's hard to believe that we're not done, that we still have 20 living hostages still in Gaza. And so we're hoping and praying that this war ends very, very soon.
Amen, brother. I mean, it's really, I'm glad you're bringing in these insights that people won't have any idea how life would have been because you rely on news, and news can only share as much. And sometimes you wonder if they're sharing even the full story or not. So the war starts now. The IDF enters into Gaza. The fight is against Hamas. And all of a sudden now you're getting rockets from Hezbollah. So it's becoming a two sides war. How did that really, unfold? And how was life at that time? I mean, we're talking about a small, tiny country, by the way. I mean, it's like basically you're getting rockets from both sides.
If anybody wants to just open up Google Maps and just look at the Middle East and North Africa, and you will see how small of a nation we are. We don't have much real estate. We are outnumbered 99 to really more than 99 to 1 in terms of square miles. And it was a dark time. It was very heavy. The atmosphere was heavy. I don't know how many people, I think I've heard, I don't want to misquote, but 60-70% of Israelis are on medication. We were being attacked by Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, and then the Houthis. You don't want to forget them. We were being attacked by the Houthis in Yemen, who were sending ballistic missiles, attacking ships in the Red Sea. And so it was a dark time, and our own, government was deeply divided. I mean, you come together in the midst of war, but then somehow, whether it's coronavirus or whatever issue it is, in whatever nation you're in, a democratic nation, things tend to, there's a right and a left. And so between our own divisions in the country being attacked, it was just a heavy, dark time. But the tide really turned last summer. There were several. You see, our army is not made for the type of war that we're in Gaza. And every time I say Gaza, I do this. That's because I'm 10 miles from Gaza. Right out my window here. I can drive there in 10, 15 minutes. That's how close I am to the northern border of Gaza. I go to sleep hearing the sounds of war. So it's crazy. But our army was not built for a 2-year war. What we did in Iran, the 12-day war, if that name ends up sticking. That was President Trump's nickname for the war. If that, the 6-Day War in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, that was, I think, 20 days roughly. So we're built for those types of wars where we win very quickly. But our army was not built for a 2-year war. So it has been very difficult. And the tide turned, and we rely on intelligence to win these wars. And so what happened last year, many people might remember, there were several quick wins for the IDF that turned the tide of everything. So first, I can't remember the exact order, but there was the Hamas chief, Ismail Haniyeh, who was in Iran for a funeral, and he was there for the funeral of the president of Iran and the foreign minister, whose helicopter just fell out of the sky, which I just have to believe was the hand of God. Iran, the chief state sponsor of terrorism around the world, the most destabilizing force in the world, next to maybe North Korea. But North Korea says, they're dangerous, but they keep to themselves. Iran is actively involved in killing people on a regular basis. So their helicopter just falls out of the sky, and Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, goes there for the funeral, and he's got an apartment in Tehran where he stays on a regular basis when he's visiting, and he did not know that our Mossad had put a bomb in that apartment, and it went off that night, and he died. So that was a great embarrassment to the Iranian regime, and of course they vowed revenge, and I can remember, and that may have been towards the end. I'm getting my dates all mixed up, but I do remember the response and literally being on my balcony and watching. It was like watching Star Wars. You can see the ballistic missiles being met by the, we call it David Sling, which is the Iron Dome is for short range missiles. David Sling is for these more intercontinental ballistic missiles. So it was crazy. Then there was the beeper issue. I don't know if folks remember that, but in Lebanon, the Hezbollah, they rely on low-tech technology. They use beepers. They don't use cell phones. It's too easy, I guess, I guess they thought that would be too easy for Israel to infiltrate. But what they did not know is that we had a secret operation going back many years where even the manufacturer of or I should say the distributor of these pagers did not know that we had planted explosive devices in all of these pagers. So they had these new pagers, they had these new hand radio. And again, I am not somebody who celebrates death, not even of my enemies. So I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. But when somebody's trying to kill you and your family, you would rather them not survive than you not survive. And that's the situation we were in. So these pagers suddenly, they all start beeping all over, thousands of terrorists. These are not nice people. These are terrorists. These are killers. And they take their pager off and they explode. Some of them exploded on their bodies. Some, they went to look at it. And it was very embarrassing for Hezbollah. And then the next day when they were all at their funerals, for those who died, they had two-way radios that began to explode. And it got to the point where, and I'm not joking, they were afraid to open the microwave. They did not know what else the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, had booby-trapped. So after that, we were able to take out the head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, and many of their top leaders. And at that point, within a matter of months, they were ready for a ceasefire. And now they're so weak that even Lebanon is not afraid of them. Now, what do I mean by that? A lot of folks don't know that Hezbollah is an army inside of a nation. The nation is Lebanon. The Lebanese have their own army, but Hezbollah was scarier than the Lebanese army. So that would be, for folks in America, that would be like there being another army other than the U.S. Army inside America that the U.S. Army didn't want any confrontation with. But now that has changed, and Lebanon has told, last week when we were in the war with Iran, Lebanon told Hezbollah, stay out of it. So we had lots of wins over last summer, and then there was the taking out of the leader, the military leader of Hamas, Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, who was the mastermind behind October 7th. And he was the one, actually, he was supposed to wait for Iran, and they were supposed to do it simultaneously with Iran and Hezbollah, and they thought that they could wipe out Israel completely. But he did not wait, and so he was taken out around the same time, and as well as many of the top leaders of Hamas. And that was really the turning point. That's when we began to think, okay, that's when we began to trust our army again. We lived and I personally don't live in fear, because I'm living in the grace of God, and I'm here on a mission, to reach as many Jewish people as I can with the good news of Yeshua. And we really do walk in the grace of God. But the average Israeli had lost faith in our army, in our intelligence agencies. But they recovered well. And now here we are today.
Yeah, thank you so much for this amazing summary. It's still terrible, and we agree with you that nobody wants to celebrate death, and I also ache for the Palestinians who are suffering on account of what Hamas has done. I mean, people don't think about it that way. They somehow associate Hamas with the Palestinian people, and an attack on Hamas is an attack on the Palestinian people. That's not true. The Palestinian people actually, at least from some of the reports that I got from people who are from there, they're in bondage to, enslaved, I should say, by Hamas. They're threatened, if you leave, you're going to lose your family or children. So it's a complicated situation. I mean, it's easy for the media just to make these big claims. So with that in mind, brother, the outcome of this, in my humble view, not only to expose the extent of how Iran was involved and its tentacles were reaching everywhere, but anti-Semitism started to emerge. Yeah. I mean, what do you say about that? I mean, it's so surprising to me, the level of anti-Semitism that we're seeing lately.
Yes, and we shouldn't be surprised. The Bible says that in the end times, Zechariah 12, that all nations will come against Jerusalem. It doesn't say a few nations, it says all nations. And so, biblically speaking, reading prophecies, that eventually the nations of the world are going to turn against Israel. In the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist forces will be anti-Israel. He will be wanting to attack Israel, and will in the last final battle before Yeshua comes back. So on the one hand, I'm not surprised, but yet it is shocking. And it's not just from the left, it's from the far right. And so, you've got Tucker Carlson, who, I've been saying for a long time that he is anti-Semitic, but now people are beginning to see that in his interview with Ted Cruz a couple of weeks ago. But at the beginning of this war, he interviewed a Palestinian pastor, and Tucker Carlson said, not the pastor. I mean, the pastor said some other very difficult things, but Tucker said that Israel has a goal, and I'm paraphrasing, that our goal is to kill the Christians in Gaza. Now, Tucker Carlson doesn't know anything about Christians in Gaza. There are less than 1,000. And I can guarantee you that it is not a goal of the IDF or Israel to kill those 800. The biggest threat to those people is Hamas, not to Israel, not from Israel. And so, what happened after October 7th and on October 8th, I mean, you have this gentleman now running for mayor in New York, who is, a socialist, who on October 8th, the day after, he blamed what happened on the occupation. So he blamed the raping, the murder, the kidnapping. Ultimately it is Israel's fault. And so that became we didn't have to wait weeks and months. It was immediate. In Australia, Sydney, Australia, I believe, at the Opera House on October 7th in the evening, they were chanting "Gas the Jews." So it spread wide and far immediately. There were professors in Harvard and Columbia that were cheering on what Hamas was doing and blaming it on the Jewish people. With again, right out of the gate, there was a group in one university where a bunch of Jewish students had to lock themselves in the library because a mob was coming after them. Of course, you can remember on the campuses, and these are left-wing groups who just don't. I don't want to belittle them, but they're ignorant to the facts on the ground, because these are all pro LTG, I can't even say it, LGBTQ groups, and if they were in Gaza, they would be killed. If they went into Gaza with a rainbow flag and said, we need to celebrate diversity, we need to celebrate whoever you want to love is okay, if it's two men or two women, they would be killed. That is illegal in Hamas controlled territory. So it was strange bedfellows, if you will, where you have these people that are celebrating, things that Islam does not celebrate, and yet siding with Hamas against the Jewish people. I remember early on, there was an interview in England. There was a bunch of students that were protesting Israel, and the interviewer said, well, what do you think about what happened on October 7th? So it's like a month later. And these two girls together, students protesting against Israel, protesting against the war. And he says, what do you think about what happened on October 7th? And they said, well, what happened on October 7th? And he said, oh, Hamas attacked Israel. They killed a bunch of people, kidnapped. And they're like, no, what? Really? No, we didn't know anything about that. So that is the ignorance that is, in our college campuses, where it becomes the cause of the day. And all you know is that Israel big, Hamas small. That's all you know. And you're not looking at the values. You're not looking at what each group is fighting for. And like you said, the Palestinian people, by and large, I think if given the opportunity to live in peace, the majority would want to live in peace. Now, some of them have been indoctrinated from the time that they're children. They don't know anything. They think somebody like me, just a normal Israeli, is a bloodthirsty killer, a rapist. This is what they grow up hearing. I remember in Syria, during the Syrian civil war, there was a man who was rescued, and he was airlifted to Italy, where he was then interviewed by an Israeli journalist, but he did not know that the journalist was Israeli or Jewish. And this guy's, again, he lived in Syria all his life. He had never met a Jew. And now he's facing a Jew who's interviewing him, and he's telling him about how scary the Jews are. And I think by the end of the conversation, the journalist said, I'm Jewish. And that's not what we're like, but that's what they grew up thinking. But given the opportunity, with the freedom of information, by the way, you don't have that in Gaza. You don't have freedom of the press. If you are a Western journalist and you don't print what they want you to print, they won't let you back in. So they blackmail the journalists to print what they want. And the people grow up there not really knowing what a Western lifestyle is like.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. I know our time is almost approaching the end, because I'd like to invite you maybe next month to come in and talk just about anti-Semitism in general, and about those biblical passages that should help people understand that this is expected. It's not like a surprise. Of course, a surprise is the level of ignorance, as you stated, at so-called prestigious elite colleges that are supposedly producing people who are intelligent, smart, and will be future world leaders. We'll see how that goes. Well, brother, one of the disturbing things also that you alluded to is that some of the Christians also were taking sides. And to me, that was really troubling. It's one thing to talk about, of course, the innocent people and the victims from both sides. It's another to just draw a line and say, I'm only on this side. It doesn't really matter what facts are saying. How did that unfold inside Israel?
Yeah, well, you have a lot of different theologies, and now what you have is theology meeting reality. And so, in the beginning of really just 20 years after the resurrection of Jesus, you already had replacement theology. And replacement theology, or supersessionism, that is the belief that the church is the new Israel, has replaced Israel. All the promises of God that God gave to Abraham are now to the church, and they're no longer to the Jewish people. Jewish people are there is no unique calling on their lives and or on the nation. But they do get to keep the curses. I do find that very generous within replacement theology. And then later on, the replacement theology, and again, I don't have time today, but I'd love to open up. That's why Paul wrote the book of Romans. Paul is refuting a a lie that was spreading throughout the Roman church, that God was finished with the Jewish people. God was against the Jewish people. That's why he talks so much about Israel in the book of Romans. And so what we have today is we have these competing theologies. You have replacement theology, or what some call now fulfillment theology. And then you have, what I would just call reading the Bible, messianic theology. It's prevalent in dispensationalism, just the idea that God's hand is still in Israel. And let me just say two things about that, what it doesn't mean. That doesn't mean that Israel is a perfect nation. It doesn't mean that our government is incapable of making mistakes. I can tell you as an Israeli, our government makes mistakes, just like any government around the world. They're just human beings. They don't walk around with a halo on their heads because they're Israeli or Jewish. And so, we're not saying that the Jewish people cannot make mistakes and that you should support Israel. And part of being a friend sometimes is saying, hey, you shouldn't do that. But when you have all the nations of the world, for the most part, lining up against Israel, and then you have the Bible saying that these things are going to happen, you have to think about that. So one of the things that I challenge people who believe in replacement theology, fulfillment theology, is I say, go back and look at the prophecies. You've got over 60, maybe 70 prophecies that speak about the Jewish people being scattered from the land of Israel and coming back into the land of Israel in the end times. Now, if you had told me about those prophecies in, say, 1801, and you said, Ron, we know that those prophecies are not about the Jewish people, they're about the church, because look at the Jews. They're all over the world. They're poor. They're broken. They don't have a nation. Nobody likes them. I might have agreed with you. Like, it just did not look good for the Jewish people. But then you have 1948, where Jews have come back from just like Jeremiah said, just like Ezekiel said, I will take you out from all the nations where I've scattered you and gather you back to your own land. So it's happened just as the prophets had said. In fact, Jeremiah has this one prophecy in chapter 16, verse 14, where he says, the day is going to come where you will not say, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought the children of Israel up out of the land of Egypt, but you will say, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought the children of Israel out of the land of the north and from all the nations where I've scattered you.
That's right.
So the land of the north is not Babylon. If I go north from Israel, I'm not in Iraq, which is Babylon, but I will end up in Moscow or Kiev or the former Soviet Union. And so that came to pass. 1 million Russian-speaking Jews came out of the former Soviet Union in the 1990s back into the land of Israel. And of course, I said there's 60, 70 prophecies that have come to pass. So at a certain point, you have to say, okay, the prophets said it, and it's so unlikely because there's no example in history of a people being separated from their geographical homeland for more than a few generations without being absorbed into the nations, except for Israel. Israel is the only example in world history of a nation being scattered and then 2,000 years later coming back into their homeland and becoming a viable nation again. So again, we're not saying that Israel's perfect or that you should never have criticism. We're saying that there is grace in this country, or we be gone. 78 years, I said 77 earlier, but 78 years that we've been rebirthed as a nation. We've been attacked by Egypt, by Syria, by Iraq, by Jordan, by Lebanon, by Hezbollah, by Hamas, now by Iran. We have a country that's trying to get nuclear weapons, that their primary goal as a nation is not to feed their nation. It's not to have a strong economy. It's not to be a prosperous nation. It is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. That is the goal of the Iranian regime. By the way, not the Iranian people. I believe the Iranian people want peace. So that's what we have lived with, and yet we're thriving as a nation. That could only be the hand of God. So when the prophets prophesied and then it happens, maybe you want to check your theology.
Amen. Well, brother, this is a deep topic, and I would love to invite you to come in August, and you and I can work on the date. So you can start walking us through biblical passages, and we can do part 1, part 2, or you can do an hour and a half if you want, because I've been following, the arguments you raised. I followed your response to Cutter, by the way, Tucker, I should say, Carlson, and I appreciate the fact that you took the time to do so. People need to be educated. This idea of replacement theology and, no theological or biblical support for it, to be honest. And you have to really help them go through these multiple prophecies and references that you have shared. I would argue it was in the tens that you've shared, maybe even more. And would like just for people, hopefully, to learn from it. Like you said, we cannot really force people to accept something, but at least you have to argue back against these ideologies and teachings and, in my humble view, false theological interpretations sometimes, where you have emotions that are feeding into it rather than factual. And I love the arguments that you just raised, that which nation? You have their people scattered for 2,000 years. I mean, by that time, they disappeared. I mean, you would argue that they completely got absorbed, disappeared. You hear this all the time. Oh, I'm Irish. They can't even trace back, their origin. But, I think I came from an Irish blood. But that's about it. Now you have a nation where everybody was gathered back again, just like the Bible says, not because I'm saying it, not because you're saying it. The Word of God is telling us the truth. God can foresee the future and foretold the future for all of us. And that scares me because he's telling us a lot worse is going to happen also in the future.
Yeah.
So we have to take his word seriously.
If I can just add that when I say that God is called Israel, the covenant that God made with Abraham was not salvific. In other words, it did not have eternal life involved in it. That is through Yeshua, for Jew, for Gentile. The one new man is Jew and Gentile. But that does not mean that God's covenant with Abraham and his seed is broken. That was a covenant that guaranteed this land, blessings in this life, and God's favor. I will make you into a great nation. So I think where a lot of people get hung up is they thought, well, how can God have his people, the church, and then have a covenant with his other group that doesn't even recognize Yeshua? Well, in Romans chapter 3, verses 1-4, God says it doesn't depend on their faith. He let God be true and every man a liar. So God is faithful to Israel, not because the Jewish people are obedient, but because God is faithful. And God is being faithful to his own promise, and he's using Israel for his own purposes. And understand this, Christian. If not for the Jewish people, you would not have Jesus. Jesus came through the Jewish nation to the world. The Bible was written by Jewish people. The entire New Testament, and I believe Luke was Jewish. Every New Testament writer was Jewish. The original apostles who went to the nations were Jewish. And it was people in the temple like Anna and Simeon. And by the way, Luke only mentions 2 people because he couldn't mention 5,000 people. There's not enough room. Those 2, one male, one female, are prototypes of the call of Israel, which was to be an intercessory nation that birthed the church. So now, here we are 2,000 years later, God is calling you not to attack the Jewish people, but to contend for their salvation through prayer, through fasting, and standing with ministries here in Israel that are sharing the good news.
Amen. I love that, brother, because it's one thing to say God is faithful to his covenant. It's another that people assume just because this guy is a Jew, somehow they have a green light to do whatever. No, that's not what my brother is saying here. His whole ministry is focused on also Jewish people. So yes. God is not going to turn his back on his covenants. And he made it clear, even if why do you think he asked Abraham to cut the animals in half and only God walked both sides? Because he wants to ensure that his side of the deal is always going to be fulfilled. But Jesus himself told the Samaritan woman, salvation comes from the Jews. He made it very clear. So thankful, of course, brother, for your pastoral side of your ministry, and also for your knowledge about the Bible. And I really would love to invite you back so we can go biblically speaking through these passages. I want people to really get education on this. And hopefully they can use it in their own peaceful, civilized arguments with people. It's not about igniting fights. It's about really reasoning with everybody. So, brother, last words for you. Anything you want to share with us? How can people connect with you one more time?
Just go go to roncantor.com and you can learn all about what we do. You can learn about Shalano TV, which is our Hebrew language gospel channel. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you a free book
I
about
did sign up,
revival.
by the way.
Very good. You get a free book about revival in the end times. And let me thank you. It's great to be with you. And I love every opportunity to be able to share what I believe is biblical truth with as many people that will listen.
Amen, brother. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And I promise you, will work on having Ron back again next month to continue this conversation. And I brought Joel Richardson recently to give us also his perspective on things. And I know we share a common relationship with the brother. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. This is Al Fadi over and out. God bless. Take care, guys.